The Life of Neito Monoma, My Hero Academia. Neito Monoma, also known as Phantom Thief, is a student in Class 1B at UA High School, training to become a pro hero. Welcome to the Amagi! In today's video, we're going over the life of Neito Monoma. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Background. Since he was a child, Neito has always wanted to be a hero. However, due to the nature of his quirk, people constantly told him that this was not possible because he could not do anything without the help of others, being ridiculed for that. Although this did not make him desist in his efforts to be a hero, he did understand that to fulfill his goal, he has to resort to unheroic behaviors and tactics. UA Sports Festival Arc. Before the cavalry battle begins, Neito tells Tetsu that there are no hard feelings between their teams. Soon after the round begins, Neito is able to steal Toru Hagukure's headband with ease. He follows up by stealing the headband of Katsuki Bakugo. After stealing Katsuki's headband, Neito takes a moment to explain his strategy from the obstacle race, explaining that he and some of his classmates threw the obstacle race in order to scout Class 1A's quirks, remaining at the back down the lower end of the top 40 to keep a low profile, while from the front, Katsuki and his class freely expose their quirks to everyone's watching. Neito comments that it was foolish on their part to obsess about the preliminary round and continues to taunt Katsuki, talking about how he is famous for being the victim of the sludge villain incident. Now furious, Katsuki promises to eliminate Neito's team. Sen pleads for him to stop provoking Katsuki, which Neito apologizes for, saying, probably sarcastically, that it was unheroic of him. But even so, Neito says Katsuki is like a moronic villain desperate for revenge. Greatly irritated, Katsuki attacks, but Neito evades and counters using Katsuki's own explosion on him. Then, Neito quickly touches Eijiro Kirishima and uses his quirk to block the subsequent strike. Katsuki then realizes Neito's quirk is the ability to copy other people's powers, and Neito says he's impressed that even an idiot like him could figure it out. When Katsuki tries to attack again, Neito's classmate Kojiro Bando uses his quirk to immobilize Team Bakugo. As the other teams close in, Team Monoma turns to leave the area, deciding to stay away from the other teams for the remainder of the match and just let the clock run out. But not before Neito fires one last shot at Katsuki, sarcastically wondering if he could really keep to the pledge about winning he made at the beginning of the sports festival. In a fit of rage, Katsuki flies at them, jumping away from the rest of the team, and Neito, a little panicked by this sudden attack, orders Kosei to block him with this solid air quirk. However, this does little to deter Katsuki, as he simply punches through the wall of air and grabs two of Neito's headbands before being pulled back to his team by Hanta Sero's tape. Other teams try to capitalize on Team Monoma, but Kosei manages to repel them with his quirk, and he realizes that, with one high-scoring headband left, they're still in 4th place, Neito agreeing to settle for this as it's still a qualifying place. But Katsuki clearly isn't finished with Neito, as he and his team quickly close the distance between the two teams, readying himself for another attack. Kosei tries to stop him, but again, Katsuki just blasts through the air shield, taking Neito's last headband. The cavalry battle ends, and without any points, Team Monoma fails to advance to the finals. Having been eliminated from the primary competition, Neito reluctantly participates in the recreational activities provided prior to the final round. He takes notice of all of Class 1A's students doing their best in the activities and insults them for taking the recreational games too seriously. During the scavenger hunt, Itsuka Kendo turns Neito in since she needs a perverse person. Neito says that she may have the wrong impression of him, but she claimed it was fine. And when Ibara Shiozaki easily defeats Denki Kaminari, Neito taunts Class 1A. Itsuka restrains him with a blow to the back of his neck and apologizes to them for his behavior. 5 fights later, Neito is seen paying close attention to the duel between Katsuki and Ochiko Uraraka. Noticing Ochiko's strategy long before many of the other viewers, commenting that some of them need to look closer at the battle. And when Ochiko finally makes her move, he explains her plan of action to his class. After Katsuki defeats Fumikage Tokoyami in the semifinals, Itsuka teases Neito by saying that he chose a scary person to make an enemy out of, but he just replies that Katsuki was lucky his quirk worked so well in the matchup. In the sports festival closing ceremony, Neito joins his class in honoring the first, second, and third place winners. Final Exams Arc. Just prior to the end of their first term, Neito confronts Class 1A in the lunchroom, purposely bumping his arm against Izuku Midoriya's head, taunting him about his encounter with the hero killer, Stain, and asking him, somewhat sarcastically, what sort of villains they would bring down upon the rest of the school. Itsuka steps in and knocks Neito out with a single chop, apologizing for his behavior and telling them about what Class 1B was told will be in the final practical, which was the topic of their conversation before Neito's interruption. He regains consciousness towards the end of their conversation and berates her for sharing information, but she just knocks him out again and drags his unconscious body away. Forest Training Camp Arc. Following the end of the first semester at UA High, Class 1B joins Class 1A for training camp over summer break. While boarding the buses to head to the Forest Lodge, Neito taunts Class 1A about some of their students failing the final exams. Itsuka knocks him out to stop him and drags him onto the bus. When Class 1B arrives at the training camp, their homeroom teacher Vlad King explains that they will be extending their quirks, and that the more they use their quirks, the stronger they will be by breaking their limits. The next day, Neito participates in taking extra lessons with the 5 members of Class 1A who failed in the finals. Despite having failed himself, he taunts them since more people failed in 1A than 1B. Mandalay sends out a telepathic message that the training camp is under attack, causing Neito to question how that's possible since the camp was supposed to be a secret. Shortly afterward, Dabi attacks the extra lessons group classroom, but Vlad King and Shota Aizawa stop him, Neito praising his homeroom teacher's skill. However, when the villains succeed in their mission of capturing Katsuki, Neito and other students feel devastated at the loss of one of their classmates. Provisional Hero License Exam Arc. To prepare for the upcoming Provisional Hero License exam, Vlad King has Class 1B train at Gym Gamma, and when they arrive for training, Vlad King tells Shota to excuse his class. In his hero costume, Neito taunts Class 1A once again about competing with them in the exam, and when the teachers explain that the two classes won't compete against one another, and Neito actually appears to be relieved, although he covers this up as best he can with more mocking comments. Shie Hassaikai Arc. When UA schedules an assembly outside the school's dormitories, Neito greets Class 1A with mockery. He reveals that he heard that 2 of their classmates failed the provisional license exam, laughing at their apparent failure. Eijiro then questions whether Neito again failed the exam, only for the latter to reveal that all of Class 1B have passed the exam, including him. Neito proceeds to trick his classmate Pony Tsutonori into trash-talking Class 1A when she informs them of an upcoming joint training session. Neito gives Pony a thumbs up after she unintentionally insults Class 1A, in which Itsuka scolds him for teaching the young girl bad phrases while knocking him out as usual. UA School Festival Arc. Neito, along with the rest of Class 1B, is preparing a fantasy play dubbed Romeo, Juliet, and the Prisoner of Azkaban, The Return of the Kings, where he plays the role of the main character Romeo. Likewise, Neito registers Itsuka in the beauty contest, forcing her to participate. He does it because Itsuka is popular and therefore has a chance to win, which would increase Class 1B's prestige, and also because, while Itsuka is busy with the contest, he is free from her hand chops. He comes across Izuku and Mirio Togata, while they take Eri on a tour around UA. As usual, Neito flaunts Class 1B's superiority and boasts about the show his class is rehearsing, until Yosetsu Awase whacks him with a board and apologizes for his actions, explaining to them that Itsuka isn't around to restrain him because of the beauty contest. Mirio apologizes to Eri for UA's dark side, Neito. During the UA school festival, Class 1B put on its stage play. The audience believes they crammed way too much into that, but they couldn't help finding it hilarious and enjoyable. Then the beauty pageant takes place. After the participants' parades, Neito steps onto the catwalk and insistently asks attendees to vote for Itsuka Kendo, until Itsuka herself knocks him out and takes him out of the catwalk. Neito is disappointed when Nejire Hado is the winner. Joint Training Arc. Neito loudly announces the arrival of Class 1B, claiming that the momentum is now moving to their side. Neito presents the results of the questionnaire he published, showing that there was a 2-vote preference for Class 1B's performance in the school festival over Class 1A's. As Neito continues to shout and taunt Class 1A as they begin their first joint training, Itsuka and Yosetsu both move and scold him, but Shota intervenes first by strangling him with his binding cloth. They then learn that they will have a special guest, Hitoshi Shinso, who is trying to transfer to the hero course. Neito becomes excited once Hitoshi mentions that he's not participating for the sake of making friends. Upon selecting teams, Neito is paired with Yui Kodai, Nirengeki Shoda, Reiko Yanagi, and Hitoshi for round 5. Neito immediately welcomes Hitoshi with open arms, happily willing to cooperate with the hero in training in hopes of crushing Class 1A. Throughout the matches, Neito comments on his class performance while insulting Class 1A with increasing signs of insanity, much to the dismay of his team. During joint training battle / round 4, Neito expects that Katsuki will behave recklessly and allow his team to fail. However, he's flabbergasted to watch Katsuki save Kyoka and cooperate with his comrades in battle. Neito learns from Denki and Eijiro that this isn't new, since Katsuki has developed and he's unable to comprehend Katsuki's teamwork and victory over his class. Neito later clashes with Izuku during the 5th round of the joint training battle. Neito admits that he has to be on full guard since he's aware of Izuku's outstanding fighting technique. When they meet in battle, Neito tries to provoke him to respond, but fearing that he had copied Hitoshi's brainwashing quirk, Izuku remains silent. Besides this, Neito continues provoking Izuku, even to the point of sadistically taunting Katsuki about his involvement in ending All Might's career. Angered, Izuku aims his Air Force technique directly at his foe. Before Izuku can ever release his attack, mysterious black power bursts out of his arm and goes on a rampage. Thanks to the cooperation between Ochiko and Hitoshi, Izuku could be stopped and the mysterious power controlled. Neito takes advantage of their guard being down and ambushes Izuku. He manages to touch him and therefore copy his quirk and attempts to activate One for All against Ochiko, but it doesn't appear to work, allowing Ochiko to defeat him and lock him up. Neito attempts to attack Ochiko using Poltergeist as she takes him to the makeshift prison, but to no avail. Noticing her wariness of him potentially copying brainwashing, Neito explains that he has improved the time limit of his quirk to 10 minutes and that he can now hold 4 quirks. While in the cell, Neito used his copy twin impact to attack Izuku and throw him off, but fails to knock him out. Even though Class 1B loses the match, Neito still retains his old demeanor. Neito begins to rant about how his team didn't lose in terms of substance and reveals his newfound knowledge relating to Izuku's quirk. He implies that he could easily beat Izuku if they were to rematch. Despite his disrespectful and harsh attitude during the battle, Izuku does not seem to hold any grudge against Neito. In fact, he was worried about him when he tried to use One for All, fearing for his physical integrity. The next day, while trying to find out more about Eri's rewind to help Shota, Neito reveals aspects of One for All that Izuku doesn't himself know. Neito says that he couldn't use Izuku's quirk properly because, just like Eri's, it requires stored up energy to work, and as Copy can't take that, it isn't possible for him to use it. Endeavor Agency Arc. With the Hero Public Safety Commission's ordering of the 2nd round of hero work studies, Neito partners with Pony Tsunotori. Paranormal Liberation War Arc. During the assault on the Paranormal Liberation Front, while most of the classmates of Class 1B took part in the Gunga Mountain Villa raid, the remaining members, including Neito and Pony, joined Vlad King in taking down a hideout in a different area, with the former two serving as logistical support, cheering on their teacher. UA Traitor Arc. With the pro-heroes plan set in motion, Vlad King tells Neito that he will play a key role by copying Kurogiri's Warp Gate quirk. Neito asks if they're being serious when they expect him to master Warp Gate in a few days. Shota Aizawa tells him he's unsure if he is currently Kurogiri or Oboro Shirakumo, and his erasure will be rendered useless due to losing his eye. Neito comments that Jakku City incident would have been a massacre had it not been for Shota, then expresses how he's been told his whole life that he will never be a hero with his quirk, and that he only fits as a supporting role or a bit player. Vlad King reassures him that there is no such thing as a bit player, and that he has always been a star. When All for One visited his pawn, Yuga Aoyama, under the belief that he had betrayed Izuku, Yuga revealed that it was all an act to lure him. All for One uses warping to summon the Paranormal Liberation Front, but Neito activates Warp Gate to summon all of the pro heroes to fight against the villains, all the while laughs while boasting that he's the man behind the curtain. After All Might activates the Troy system to trap all of the villains in cages, Neito prepares to open portals beneath their feet to split them up. Current arc. After the majority of the villains were sucked into the Warp Gate, Neito teleports himself back to the UA Flying Sky Fortress to prepare for the next phase of the plan, defeating Tomoda. To ensure that Tomoda is contained within the Sky Fortress, and to prevent him from using any of his quirks or decay, Neito teleports himself outside of the electric barrier and positions himself to keep his sights on him at all times while using Shota's erasure on him, accompanied by Shota and Manuel. He laughs mockingly at the villain without his quirks, while his eyes are being moisturized by Manuel and Shota being close to enable the 5-minute limit. Now trapped inside the electrified barrier supported by the electrical heroes, Katsuki, Tamaki, Nejire, Edgeshot, and Mirko prepares to fight Tomoda. The UA Flying Sky Fortress was designed for Tomoda thanks to the number of heroes cooperating with one another to seal his fate inside the fortress. Ultimately, the plan is already failing when Izuku was supposed to be in the UA Flying Sky Fortress to fight Tomoda, and what's worse is that Tomoda's left hand suddenly begins to transform into a monstrous blob of fingers, sending a constructive mass of fingers directly towards Mirko. Although Mirko was able to survive the attack, the grotesque swarm of fingers from Tomoda is revealed to be the growth from the body, just as is the case with his hair or nails, making his body try to adapt to his ever-evolving quirks. The form leading to the next step of the superhuman society, Dr. Kyudai Garaki's quirk singularity. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.